It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Got a great show for you today. It's another work week, folks, but I tell you, the retirement things, it's a racket. Let me tell you, I wake up every Monday morning and go, yes, because I don't have to go to work this week, but I got to do the podcast, and it isn't like I got to. It's something that I want to do, and it's because of guests like we're going to have on today. Folks, we're going to have Dr. Andrew Nish coming back on Podcast by George. And for folks that haven't seen him on the show, Dr. Nish has spent almost 3 decades as an interventional radiologist. We're going to be talking about cancer today on a lot of different levels. His passion is educating the public and health care workers about true health and well-being and how this can be achieved through lifestyle changes, including food and nutrition, stress management, sleep, exercise, purpose in life, and social relationships. He's especially fascinated with the mind-body connection. He talks about that all the time. You ever hear that he's speaking somewhere, go see his presentation because it is outstanding. And he talks about how our thoughts and beliefs directly influence our physical and mental health. Okay, let's bring his slide down off of the screen and bring this up and bring him in and say good morning to the good doctor. Hi, Doc.
Morning, George.
You know, I want to get going. We got a lot of topics to cover. I want to do some housekeeping here and cover some things that are medical in nature, that I can't not mention. I want to take a breeze through these. COVID is still in the top of the news, and I just kind of wanted to go real local. I mean, you can't get any more local than this. I'm a Warren County boy, born and raised, and this is from a guy that I know, Bo Bowman at KCCI News. He's a friend of the great Courtney Kinser, the videographer out of Des Moines that's been shooting video on local television for, over 3 decades, I think. And anything that's happened in Des Moines, Courtney's been all over it, and Bo works with him. So any friend of Courtney's is a friend of mine. Bo says the Iowa Department of Public Health reported, I'm going to get this big enough that I can read it, on Wednesday that over 6,400 people tested positive for COVID-19 in the past 7 days. That's nearly 2,000 more positive cases than the previous 7 days. Indianola, Iowa has been impacted by the resurgence of cases in Iowa. Tuesday afternoon of last week, the post office was closed as cases rise in Warren County. And I kind of did a head snap when I saw, really? I mean, that's how bad it is as far as infections are concerned. The post office was closed. That sounds like, shutdown territory. The post office was open Wednesday when KCCI and Bo went there. The postmaster said she couldn't provide Bo with any of the details, but people in Indianola are staying cautious as numbers begin to climb again. That harkens me back to my reporting days. I mean, Bo Bowman went down there with a camera crew, asked this postmaster, hey, were you closed? I know. Can't talk, can't say anything. God, I used to hate that. I mean, you were closed, right? I mean, that's public record. Everybody knows that. You can at least comment on the closure, but, that's the way people are when the microphones come out, I guess. Now, the public health administrator, Joel Stolte, says most of the cases in Warren County are in people between the ages of 18 and 29. Stolte also fears there may be more cases going unreported. That's because people are using home testing kits and they're not reporting them. So it's undoubtedly higher. You probably have seen that in the news. She says hospitalizations are still very low, and these numbers do not come close to what was seen at the height of the pandemic. Well, that's true. Just kind of monitoring the situation right now is where we're at here in Warren County. And the only thing that I would say about that, Doc, and I don't, I'm just covering these things as housekeeping, basically. I would say I've been sick before. I've been so sick, I'd pay a lot of money not to be sick. I mean, I would do a lot of stuff not to be sick, and I didn't go to the hospital. But, man, I was sick. I would like to avoid that. So when you see these numbers about how people are not, maybe dying at the rate that they were or not being hospitalized at the rate they were, I still make the point, but they're infected. That means they're getting sick, and you probably don't want any of that. That's my point.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with infectious disease. We've dealt with them for eons. think of the flu. We have the, flu every year. We try and predict what flu strain is going to be present. COVID is sort of becoming like that. It's endemic. It's going to be with us. The virus continues to mutate because the virus wants to do one thing. It wants to infect and reproduce. And so it's going to take every advantage possible. So we're going to continue to see mutations. There may be a new vaccine with protection against different strains come fall. Don't know, sort of see what that brings. And I think, to emphasize the point, we're seeing an increase in infections. But again, I think we're missing a lot because people are using home testing and they're certainly not reporting that to the local health agencies.
Yeah, I got to ask you this, and it's coming out of right field a little bit. I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. I see this news coverage, like Rand Paul just grilling Fauci, I mean, mercilessly. And I look at that about where this virus originated, this COVID-19 strain. And of course, a lot of people are saying that it didn't come out of a wet market in Wuhan. It came out of a lab, that this virus was in some way created or whatever. And I look at that as just a yobo out here on the street. And I think, if that's the case, they ought to hang whoever did that by the highest lanyard, because of the pain and suffering and death and pestilence that had spread around the globe. And the basis for that is, again, this is just me. I look at it and think, oh, to what end? To what good? Why would they be doing that? To weaponize a virus? What's the point of that? Well, I also have read that some of these viruses that they're working with, and this is something that you know all about, are used to combat things like cancer. And so there's reason, there's actually a beneficial or a good reason to experiment with viruses and have them in a lab. Now, is that true or not?
Oh, sure. Viruses are used to combat bacterial infections. We've used them as vectors in cancer treatment. So just because we're using viruses in a lab doesn't necessarily mean it has nefarious or devious outcomes. I take Rand Paul with a grain of salt, frankly. He's a conspiracy theorist, and I don't think right now, and I haven't, I don't buy into the whole, it was a part of a lab experiment thing. As humans encroach more and more on our natural environments, we're going to see more and more infections because, as we disrupt the natural cycle of the environment and we disrupt the fauna and flora that's naturally in the environment, as we encroach more and more on the environment, these viruses and these infections, they don't really care who the host is. They'll be happy to jump to human hosts. They're just looking for a place to replicate. So, we're going to see more and more of this. When you have cities of 30, 40, 50 million people, sanitation is an issue. We continue to burn, the Amazon we're destroying the Amazon at a record rate. And as we continue to do that, these viruses, these pathogens are going to jump to human species.
All right. Well, we didn't want to spend a lot of the show today on COVID.
I take no. Rand Paul has no credibility.
Yeah, and that's politics, and we want to spend even less on that, as the doctor said before.
Dr. Fauci's been doing this for 45 years. He's an expert, and Rand Paul's an idiot. So, sorry.
Well said. Okay, so let me bring this up on screen, because some of the show today is in what I call the "what in the hell" category, and this is one that's kind of been that way ever since it first came out. I've looked at this story and what in the hell? Here, this is from the Des Moines Register. Virginia Barada writes this story. What you need to know about monkeypox, including symptoms, after Iowa confirms its second. Bring this up on screen large here. Health officials confirmed Polk County's first case of monkeypox last week, marking the second reported case in Iowa. The patient, who was not identified, likely caught the infection while traveling within the United States. Officials from Polk County Health Department said in a statement the person is isolated, receiving outpatient care, and in touch with health department staff. What is monkeypox? Well, it's a rare disease in the same family of viruses as smallpox, according to the CDC. Symptoms are similar to smallpox, but milder, and the disease is rarely fatal. Okay, Doc, I got a cousin that worries about her health. A lot of people do, and she was worried about monkeypox. Now, she might have been in an area where there is more of this, closer to a larger city. But I told her, I said, my God, I think you're more likely to be struck by lightning in your basement than you are by of contracting monkeypox.
So, monkeypox is, it's been in the news, and I frankly have not followed it much. It's rare. It's not transmitted like COVID. It's not a respiratory virus. It's actual contact with the fluid of the vesicle that forms, or it could be contact, with bodily fluids. So it's not spread from a respiratory aspect. So unless you're in close contact with a person with monkeypox, or close contact with, let's say, clothes or sheets from a patient with monkeypox, you're not going to get it. But it's exceedingly rare. It's treated with antivirals that we can treat smallpox with. But I haven't really followed it and not been on my radar, to be honest with you.
Well, and I get that. I guess the only thing of it is you look at it as a layman again and think, oh, what if this takes off? What if this goes like wildfire? What if? Well, this isn't likely to do that because of what you've just described. There are treatments for this, right?
So the whole beauty, this is again goes back to my mind-body thing, George.
Yeah.
We're worried about a future that has not happened, and we're worried about something that is extraordinarily unlikely to happen, that this becomes a pandemic of monkeypox. And our minds, again, just so influence our health. So now we have 2 cases of monkeypox in a state of over 3 million people. And because of the news, because we put this in the headlines every day, when you read that, you think every person is going to drop dead of monkeypox. And so our minds then take that, and our minds are built for survival. So in order to survive, we have to be fearful of monkeypox. Well, that's complete fiction. And again, it has to do, to me, with the news. Why is this on the front page of the paper every day? This is a very minor blip in the radar. And we scare people, we make people nervous, we make people anxious, and there's absolutely no reason to be.
Well, in this next story, again, and this will end our housekeeping here. It maybe
end the infectious disease segment.
Yes, exactly. Well, I guess this is I don't know if this is an infectious disease.
It absolutely is.
Okay, look at this. A Missouri resident infected by a rare brain-eating amoeba. Oh my God, you could make a movie out of this. Doc, you'll have to pronounce that for me. What is it? Naegleria fowleri?
Naegleria fowleri.
Naegleria fowleri dies tragically. Southern Iowa beach remains closed. Now, monkeypox ain't likely to kill you if you get it. This is, but it's how likely are you to get it? Yeah.
Yeah. Let's put this into context, George.
Yeah.
This makes for great headlines, right? Brain-eating amoeba. Oh my gosh, like Godzilla in your brain.
Yes.
Well, in the history of where we've been recording infectious disease worldwide, there's been 154 cases reported. In the last 10 years, there's been 31 cases worldwide reported. Okay, so this is an extraordinarily, extraordinarily rare problem. Now, that being said, it does have a 97% case fatality rate, meaning if you get the amoeba, you're 97% likely to die. But it's extraordinarily, extraordinarily rare. Let's look at this in another contextual relationship, meaning this was a young child who is swimming. Over 3,000 kids a year in this country alone die from drowning. So we should be way more worried about water safety and keeping track of our kids in the water than this isolated incidence of this Naegleria fowleri.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
So,
okay, well, I just wanted to bring
it makes for great headlines.
Well, yeah.
And now everybody sticks their toe in the water and thinks, oh my God, I can't go in the water. I'm going to get the brain-eating amoeba. Here's the thing about it is it has to go up the nasal passages to get to your brain. So if you don't go underwater, you're not going to get this amoeba. Okay. Ain't going to happen.
The only other question I would have on it, everything that I see says it's most likely present in kind of still warm water, which you have during the summer.
Yeah.
Have you seen again? This is not on your radar very much, but is there any possibility that this stuff is caused by runoff and environmental
I haven't
hazards?
seen any relationship with
Okay.
that at all. It is in warm water. It really thrives at about 115 degrees.
Wow.
So it's quite warm water. And it is, obviously most common in the summer. It's more common in the southern states where the water is warmer. But again, extraordinarily rare. 10 years, 31 reported cases in this country.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Good. Well, we've got
We got bigger
stories.
fish to fry than the brain of the
Yeah.
amoeba.
But, keep a handle on that COVID situation, folks. My own personal experience with that. Now, I haven't had it, knock on wood. There we go. And I wear my mask like the doc says. I play hockey with a young guy, a great young hockey player. I mean, he's in top physical condition, got a bright future ahead of him, I think, in hockey. He got COVID, I think, for the second time in December, and he is still experiencing symptoms from that on and off. That's that long haul part of COVID that you might be able to get from this strain that's currently out there. Another reason why you don't want this, folks. So it is still an important issue, even though, people may be getting sick at a lesser rate. People may be dying at a lesser rate. They're becoming infected, and that long haul could be a part of that. Well, let me get to this next story because we're going to lose the doc. And this is a real reason that I brought him on. And this is right in his wheelhouse. Now, this is something in his world. I got this out of Becker's Hospital Review just to kind of get a different source. I'm not a regular reader of Becker's, folks, but I want to tell you what this says here. And it reads that a cancer-causing herbicide is found in 80% of U.S. urine samples. You want to talk about what in the hell? I mean, this is right at the top of the list. I mean, for me, this is up there with brain-eating amoebas, for God's sake. 80% of the urine samples tested or have got Roundup in them. Glyphosate, a cancer-causing herbicide. That's not equivocal, folks. A cancer-causing herbicide was found in 80% of urine samples from kids and adults in the U.S., the CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey found. Again, this isn't from some conspiracy theorist. This is from the CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Researchers collected samples from people in the U.S. ages 6 and older. The chemical is the active ingredient in the Roundup brand, which is owned by German pharmaceutical company Bayer. A lot of people aren't aware of that. They sold off and it moved to Germany after it bought Monsanto in 2018. CBS reported July 12th. Glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide in the country, yet until now we had very little data on exposure, says Alexis Temkin, PhD, a toxicologist at the Environmental Working Group. Children in the U.S. are every day. They'll jump off about comes to the my you see you looks why you. All right, well, it's morning, folks. Realize that the internet, there we go. It has a bunkers. Now it looks okay. Studio. Fine
Yeah, I'm struggling here, George.
Yeah, it could be you. It could be issues before. And it has to do with Monday go to meeting type thing in the workforce where people logging on to Zoom by the millions, of course. Still, some people never went back to work, remain remote as their work is concerned. And they went to Zoom and it affects them. I did hear you, but we've lost your
Well,
image.
I turned my camera off.
Oh, okay.
To see if that would help.
All right. And you might try turning it back on as we go along here at times. Now, I've got you back visually, but I'm still getting that Wi-Fi warning. Just to go back to where I was at, I was talking about how this chemical is moving through the food chain. Glyphosate.
Yeah.
Moving through the food that kids eat in particular.
Yeah, so this is not surprising. This has been measured before, but it's the first time the CDC is actually starting to keep track of this. It's been estimated that 80 to 90% of us, if we test our urine, will have glyphosate in it. So people have to understand glyphosate was developed as a herbicide, okay? And everybody's heard of Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybeans and all those different things. Um, it was developed and it blocks the production of essential amino acids in plants through a pathway called the Shikimadi pathway. That pathway does not exist in animals, and therefore they thought it would be safe for animals because we don't have that pathway. But it has not proven so. And so you have to remember glyphosate is used in many different ways. It's used on GMO, genetically modified, Roundup Ready crops, row crops such as corn, soy, canola, cotton, and sugar beets. About 80% of those GMO crops are sprayed with glyphosate. To me, the more disturbing thing is that glyphosate is used as what's called a pre-harvest desiccant. So before harvest, glyphosate is sprayed on crops to desiccate or dry those crops so that they're easier to handle, and you don't have to dry them after harvest. So we're getting a lot of glyphosate in our food because of that pre-harvest desiccant use. Most of the corn in this country is GMO. Most of the soybeans are GMO. Wheat is, a GMO crop that's sprayed with glyphosate. And so what happens is, just think of all the packaged foods in our grocery store, all the cereals, all the packaged foods that are using corn and sugar beets and wheat and soy. Those have trace amounts of glyphosate. And, I was just interested in the last line of that. The exposure is low, but the exposure is not zero. And so glyphosate is one of the most controversial and probably one of the most studied herbicides that we have. And, the WHO, the World Health Organization, came out a number of years ago and classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen. The International Agency for Research on Cancer in 2015 classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen. And it's most related to the increased risk of what's called large B-cell lymphoma. So it's been associated with lymphoma. There's been a lot of papers looking at, is there a true association, or is this, is this real or is this not real? It is extraordinarily hard to look at environmental toxicants such as glyphosate and have a one-to-one causation of cancer. So, we battled this for decades with cigarette smoke and lung cancer. It literally took decades to finally get the legislation that would allow us to, kind of take cigarettes away from the daily use. Environmental toxicants such as glyphosate, extraordinarily hard to prove that this is actual cancer causing. We can't do studies where we give one group of patients glyphosate and the other group of patients not. That is unethical. So most of these studies are what we call epidemiologic studies, where we look at large populations and see if there's increased risk of cancer based on the use or exposure to something like glyphosate. And it seems the evidence is pointing towards the fact that it does increase the risk of cancer, particularly these large B-cell lymphoma cancers. If you, look at all the literature seems to side that way. But there are other things that glyphosate is causing as well. So there are endocrine disruptors. Many of the chemicals that we have in our environment are what we call endocrine disruptors. They are very similar to endocrine molecules, think estrogen or testosterone or thyroid hormone in our bodies, and that they can literally bind to those receptors and disrupt the signaling pathways of those natural hormones in our body. So they're endocrine disruptors. Many of these chemicals are neurotoxins, meaning, and glyphosate is not a neurotoxin, but a lot of these chemicals that we spray are neurotoxins, but they can cause, disabilities in kids. They can cause abnormal neural development. They can be associated with things like ADHD and autism and things like that. So we have this widespread exposure to multiple chemicals. Glyphosate's only one of them. There's another chemical class called phthalates. Phthalates make plastic soft, okay? And phthalates have been associated with developmental disorders, neurobehavior abnormalities, insulin resistance. Look at our canned goods. Most of our canned goods are lined with a chemical called bisphenol A. Bisphenol A has been associated with endocrine disruption. It's also been associated with increased risk for obesity and insulin resistance. So we live in a sea of chemicals. Most of these chemicals are not well regulated, and we're just beginning to study the effects of these chemicals in our bodies. So the science is early, but yeah, glyphosate seems to have an association with increased risk of cancer, particularly, like I said, the large B-cell lymphoma.
I'm continuing to get an indication that this stream is not maybe going out the way that I would like. I apologize. I appreciate folks watching this. Okay, Doc, so I mean, you're a smart guy. You know all about this kind of stuff. You understand the science of it. But I got to tell you something. I'm going back to my childhood. I'm 8 years old and sitting in front of a TV watching Bugs Bunny cartoons and seeing insecticides, spray can insecticides being advertised on television. I remember thinking as a kid, as an 8-year-old, if that can kill a spider, it probably isn't good to be spraying around the house that I live in. I mean, is that an 8-year-old's logic? Or
you know what? That's a reasonable logic. But you know, here's the thing that I want to sort of emphasize to your audience. You know, glyphosate is in virtually everything we buy in the grocery store if it's not GMO. And so, you know, consumers have a choice. Consumers can vote with what they buy. And I would urge people to understand, you know, this is sort of an awareness for people, I think. Understand that glyphosate is not without human risk and that you can buy products that don't contain glyphosate. So anything that's labeled as organic cannot by law contain glyphosate. It can't be sprayed with glyphosate. Now, you can get drift, you know, across through the air and exposure to glyphosate that way, and it can deposit on organic crops. So not necessarily meaning it's zero, but it's certainly very low. And we can choose to buy products that are, you know, non-GMO products. We can choose to buy products that are organic and really kind of vote with our wallets. The more people buy things that aren't loaded with glyphosate, maybe the industry changes. The other thing we talked a little bit about is I want to talk just a wee bit about nitrates.
Sure.
Because there was a story in the Des Moines Register a few weeks ago, and I'm up at my cabin in Minnesota, but I was wondering, like, they were asking people not to water their lawns every day and that there was going to be, you know, every other day watering. And I was thinking about that, like, wait a minute, we've had a lot of rain. Why are we doing that? Well, it had nothing to do with the volume of water. It had to actually do with the fact that the Des Moines Water Works could not process water fast enough to get rid of the nitrates in the water. And this has always been kind of disturbing to me because, you know, our water in Des Moines barely right now meets EPA requirements for nitrates. So the Environmental Protection Agency says we should have 10 parts per million or less nitrates in our water to be safe. I just looked at the Des Moines Water Works report from 7/12 and we're at 8.19. So we are pushing that limit. And that limit is probably way higher than it should be. It was originally developed in 1962, and it was to prevent methemoglobinuria, which is something that happens in infants when nitrates are too high. But the Environmental Working Group did a study a number of years ago, 2018, and they looked at that threshold, and that threshold is way higher than what might cause cancer. And they estimated that between 2,300 and 12,000 cancers per year are caused by excess nitrates in our water. So that's concerning for me as a resident of Des Moines. My nitrate level is significantly higher than most municipal water systems. And it's not blaming the Des Moines Water Works. They're doing everything they can to eliminate these nitrates. It's really what's going on upstream with hog containment lots dumping manure into our system, all the fertilizer that's going into our crops, and it's all washing into waterways and polluting our waters and causing problems getting clean water. And so I want people to really understand that we've got to get these nitrates out of our water. People use water filtration systems, but like those Brita bottles, those are carbon filtration.
They don't touch it.
They don't take
Yep.
out nitrates. You have to have reverse
RO.
osmosis
Yep.
and or ion exchange. So there are ways to improve our water quality, but you kind of have to do it at the home level. But I just want people to be aware that nitrates in our water system, particularly in Des Moines, might be detrimental to human health, the levels that we have.
Well, and that's this is an issue that I do know a little something about because I've been on well water probably most of my life, and you've got to get that well tested, folks. You got to use a reverse osmosis to get those nitrates out of there, and the nitrate contamination is kind of a double whammy because what happens is when it's hot and it's in the summer and water levels are low in the river, for instance, well, the concentration of the nitrates are higher because they don't go anywhere like the water does, and then when we have these periodic violent storms, which we're having, which I think is related to the climate, like derechos and these massive thunderstorms, well, the deluge causes runoff from the fields and the lots into the river. And so then the rivers become higher. But again, the nitrate levels are really high. So, I mean, and that's not going to get any better. Yeah.
It's seasonally variable. So in the fall and winter, we have fewer nitrates because there's less runoff. There's less stuff being sprayed on the fields.
Exactly.
But it is a real concern. And, one of the great resources that I would like to give your audience is environmental working groups. So if you go to ewg.org, they test everything. They test cosmetics for stuff that isn't so good for us. But you can put in any water system in the country, and they will show you the latest testing for that water system. And so you can put in your zip code, it'll bring up Des Moines Water Works or any water system, municipal water system, and you can look at what's in your water. And then you can choose to say, geez, I really want to filter that out. And then at the bottom of that, they have a whole chart on what filters out what specific particles. So some things are filtered out by carbon filters, some things are filtered out by reverse osmosis, some things are filtered out by ion exchange. So it gives you an idea of what you would need to do in your home to get rid of some of these contaminants.
And that's a pretty simple website to remember. If I got that right, Doc, I put it up on the screen.
ewg.org. Yeah,
okay.
It's a great organization. They were one of the first ones to really kind of look at this whole glyphosate issue and test people. They've been doing that for years. But like Cheerios are full of glyphosate. And we feed them to our babies like they're candy.
Yeah, it's in baby food. I saw that. Yeah, it's actually.
So we have to be really cognizant. If you don't want these things in your food, you got to start buying non-GMO organic food. Now, some people that's not affordable. And unfortunately, we've developed this discriminatory system in our country. So food availability is very discriminatory in its pattern. And that takes some political will to change. But yeah, if you can afford it, I would recommend that, instead of buying Cheerios, buy a non-GMO organic brand of oat rings.
That's an excellent point that the doctor makes, and it has to do with cost, and that really has a huge impact on people choosing organic foods, even people choosing some vegetarian foods and those types of things. The things that are better for you oftentimes cost more, and that's part of the issue.
And I want to be really, really clear about that because people always ask me about fruits and vegetables. Well, if I can't afford organic, should I not buy them? And the answer is no, 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 no.
Yeah.
You should eat as many fruits and vegetables as possible. If you can afford organic, that might be better for you. If you can't, you're way better off eating those fruits and vegetables than other junk food. The other thing the ewg.org has is they have what's called their Clean 15 and their Dirty Dozen. So their Dirty Dozen are things that hold on to pesticides. So they're really high in pesticides. And number 1 and number 2 for years have been strawberries and spinach. But then they have the Clean 15, where it really doesn't make a lot of difference from a pesticide standpoint, whether you buy organic or non-organic. So it's a really great resource for people to help them understand, if I've got a little extra in my budget, what should I buy organic? And I would encourage you to look at that because strawberries are one, blueberries are one, things like apples and nectarines and peaches, they all really hold on to those pesticides in their skins. But other things like onions and corn and asparagus, organic, non-organic doesn't make a lot of difference.
Well, and hopefully we've raised a little bit of awareness here on this show, and because of folks like Dr. Nish, people are becoming more aware, and it's a good thing. Because Doc, I tell the story. When I was a kid, grew up on a farm. I remember seeing a guy that worked for my dad reaching down into a weed sprayer tank that had 2,4-D in it to do something. I think he was stirring it with his arm, for God's sake. I mean, that's how little people knew about the dangers of these insecticides and herbicides back in the day, and I think people are becoming more aware, hopefully.
I think there is more awareness. I think there's more science behind this, that we have studied a lot of this, and we know that a lot of these chemicals are really not good for human health, particularly if you have acute exposures like the people spraying it and the people mixing it and stuff like that.
All right, good. I had a little bit of experience. I was out in the field one time, and the anhydrous, they knife that into the ground. When they make a turn, they raise the knives out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And if that drift gets you, the wind's in the wrong direction, that will put you on your knees, boy. There's nothing like anhydrous. It is a powerful chemical. My God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I apologize for the internet issues that we had for folks that may be watching this. I might go back in and edit it a little on the replay, which is where most people see it. We're going to leave the good doctor here. Any closing comments, any observations that you want to make here before we run out of time, Doc?
I just want to emphasize that headlines like brain-eating amoeba and monkeypox, those are designed to catch your attention. They instill fear, but let's put all of these things into the context of life. And in the context of life, these have very little likelihood of affecting any of you. And so don't get anxious, don't worry, because you're becoming anxious about a future that hasn't happened and can't be predicted. So I just want people to understand these are great headlines, but will have little impact on any given individual's life.
That's great. That's a great closer. He always has a good close for us. Folks, that's Dr.
Whereas
Andrew
glyphosate will have more of an impact.
Oh, boy.
But the beauty of that is that's something that's actionable. With infectious disease, we feel helpless, right? Oh, it could come at me anytime. Glyphosate is something you can do something about. You can choose not to buy products that have glyphosate in them. And so those are organic, non-GMO products.
Yeah. And
so you have a choice. And that's good.
Watch that bug spray while your kids are watching cartoons too. All right. That's great. Thanks again, Doc. I really appreciate you coming back on another podcast by George Liveline.
Okay. Thanks, George.
Yeah, folks, I hope you enjoy that. I hope you like seeing Dr. Nish on Podcast by George. We try to get him on as often as we can. Obviously, he's very busy, but he's a medical expert in the area of cancer. So, I mean, you can pay attention to what he's talking about here. You can feel good about what you're learning on this show when Dr. Nish is on it. And if you want to see more of Podcast by George, I always encourage people now, go to podcastbygeorge.com. Just go to that website, www.podcastbygeorge.com. You can pick a platform there. If you like the videos, and again, our video wasn't great today because of the live stream, but you can watch all the videos live on Facebook and YouTube by clicking those icons. But if you want to get the audio, and a lot of times I clean those up and get rid of the issues like we had today, the audio streams are available on Spotify and iTunes and the iHeartRadio app and places like Stitcher and Deezer and all of those podcast only or audio only platforms. You can pick them up there. Just click the icon and you are in. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.